Good morning, everyone in the SoulSync community. Today we get to meet Alex, which I'm pretty excited about. It's the first time I'm meeting him as well. Should be fun. I guess we'll probably start at the top. You've done some soul searching, I guess, and you've found the Soulbound community. Do you want to give us a bit of background on sort of who you are and maybe how you got here?
Yeah, sure. My background is from traditional finance. Um, I've spent about 6 years in different roles as a quantitative researcher, analyst, um, doing various different things through from risk analysis through to structured products and eventually proprietary trading strategies for a bank. Some of that background before that, I did KYC and AML operations and it automated a load of that. And yeah, I ended up finding my way into DeFi kind of by accident through the trading route, actually. We came up with a solution for solving a particular problem in institutional trading. And that's what brought me to the solution which Keyring Network is.
That's cool. I've got a bit of background in some of all of those things as well. Maybe not so much on the trading side, but definitely exposure to the KYC AML bits. Um, so I guess yeah, probably be good to get a high level on the work you're doing now, and then we can unpack from there sort of the soulbound aspects of it, or where you think that kind of space is going. Do you want to explain a little bit more about the KYC work you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Effectively, Keyring Network is a zero knowledge compliance oracle. We allow users to prove that they're valid counterparties with each other without sharing any personal information on chain or linking their identity and a wallet together. So, kind of at the heart, we're effectively we provide a programmable authorization solution for modular compliance, which KYC and AML is one of those use cases.
Okay, and so I guess you got two counterparties that you want to trade. They can prove that they've been identified by keyring network, and
Yeah.
the two counterparties are then like able to do that trade without revealing their identity. I guess like one of the parts of know your customer is that you know who you're dealing with. I guess it's one thing for someone to be maybe verified, where I guess it's the case that Keyring knows who they are. Is that kind of right? And then people can trade, and if something
No,
goes
this is
wrong,
the point, right? So this is the whole point. So Keyring doesn't know who they are.
yep,
None of our partners know who they are. And you allow them to completely break that link between the trading wallet and the actual person doing the KYC and AML service. So it's the kind of the real world identity is completely separated from the on-chain identity.
yep. And so what you're left with is a verification that shows um, that they reflect a unique individual. So it's always the one person. Like you always know that you're dealing with maybe one person because they got the same proof, but then
Well, not even necessarily the same person, right? Because we allow people to also then um, permission certain wallets in their on their self with different proofs for deliberately that purpose to obfuscate even further um, what wallets are associated with them. So really, the main thing here is to just break that link, right? Break it between the trading wallet and the authorizer. We've seen a number of cases in launchpads, for example, where people have done KYC with the launchpad, and the launchpad maybe has messed up the airdrop that they did to the private sale purchasers, and then people who are in the private sale don't return the asset to the launchpad, and the launchpad then lists their private details on Twitter. This has been threatened, I think, from what I know, at least in two circumstances, maybe three, if my memory serves me correctly. And it's also a problem for institutional trading, as you can imagine. If you want to do a trade with a counterparty, then you need to give them a particular wallet that you're going to trade from. And if you send them your wallet, you're effectively giving them all of your pricing history and client history and future client flow. So there's a big issue there. on the institutional side.
Yeah.
And then one of the third things is that if you want to do things like private blockchain interactions through like mixers or privacy preserving cryptography. There's two types of zero knowledge, right? There's the kind of scaling version of zero knowledge, and then there's the privacy version of zero knowledge. So if you're looking to do private stuff through zero knowledge and obfuscate who you are, but you also have to do KYC. If some third party knows who you are on chain, then you're by definition not private. So keyring allows that full privacy link.
Okay. Yeah. I definitely understand that. Like, if I'm a trading desk and someone else knows what my wallet is, they can see my flow and they can see if I'm building a position or dumping a position or whatnot. I I'm like haven't really thought about this too directly, but I'm curious. Like, one of the benefits of know your customer is that you have like that social kind of security, and that like if they do the wrong thing, you can identify them, so you can go like you know who you're dealing with, and like from a compliance side, you know, if you're an operating exchange, the requirement is to know your customer, not
Yeah.
maybe not just know that they've been verified. So I can see the connection on hiding, obfuscating and protecting wallet addresses, especially when you're dealing in on chain. Um, I guess I'm curious about the sort of like the flow on of like if you don't know who your counterparty is and they do the wrong thing, or someone flags, hey, the coins you received from this wallet have been flagged as, proceeds of crime or whatever. Tell us everything you know about that individual. If you're just an individual trading and you're not like the operator, I get that you might not know, but the exchange, if it's centralized, would be expected to know in most jurisdictions. Is the idea that this is not for a centralized like operator, it's something for DeFi? Is that like is that where I'm
No, no, slightly. So there's two bits I haven't really told you about, which kind of answer those questions. First is that we have a regulatory break glass solution,
gotcha.
whereby we figured out a nifty way of distributing keys to regulatory bodies and legal entities, judiciary, without them necessarily having to accept the ownership of the key, but they
Gotcha.
by default have access to the key. That allows us to provide anybody who may issue us with a subpoena has the ability, therefore, to um, frankly break that glass with according to some kind of threshold which we specify on the protocol.
Yep.
And that obviously depends jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and there's some careful guards around that.
Okay,
We're
cool.
pretty proud of that bit, actually, if I'm being honest. We've got a top ZK researcher who's been spending a lot of time on that. In terms of what you're talking about, centralized solutions, that sort of answers the question there, because it allows us to do things like travel rule for the VASPs, and pass on the real world information of the users without necessarily revealing the on-chain wallet for those
Yep.
users. And if there is suspicious activity identified, then again that can be passed on to the relative agencies.
Yeah, okay, cool. So like in terms of like the current model, you give your KYC, they hold the identity, and they can distribute it to legal, regulatory, whatever. Like they can be, compelled to, the current exchange can be compelled to provide that. This doesn't necessarily change that if you do it doesn't change the regulatory kind of coverage over your identity and like identifying you, but you get all the upside of obfuscation of your wallets and those bits as well. Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that's pretty neat.
Yeah, I think the whole thing we're trying to do here is really tie out the traditional finance or requirements to the extent of being compliant with an investment bank, which is the utmost regulatory requirement, and also tie that into DeFi
Yep.
and the
And
anonymity that is required on chain.
yeah, and the audience that doesn't want any of that, they just won't use that product, but there'll be a yeah, that's cool. I like that. Well, let's I'm trying to find the right balance in these like sort of sessions where it's like not too shilly, but also like without that context of what you're up to, I don't know how we can like go into the exploring other areas. So like we'll try and I think that's a good overview. And I guess you're now involved at least at some to some extent in the Soulbound community, right? You've got maybe some interest there. Where do you think the Soulbound sort of the potential for Soulbound tokens play a role in maybe identity, or like what areas are you thinking of? Um, but I don't know how far down the rabbit hole you are either.
Yeah, if we're talking about Soulbound, it's kind of a weird one because we sort of sit on the periphery of this because we're not really so much doing Soulbound tokens so much as doing wallet bound stuff. By definition, we're trying not to tie, we're almost deliberately not soul binding something to a token, but
Gotcha.
we are still by definition binding credentials to a wallet that have a link to a real world identity. So in that
Right.
way, you can sort of say that we are doing something to do with soulbound tokens, but it's definitely not a case if you have one wallet corresponding to your real world identity for sure. Um, the in terms of the where this sits in the community, I think the biggest area of growth in this is frankly gaming. Gaming at the moment has probably most of the relevant activity in my mind in like right now in blockchain usage. I mean, yeah, sure, there's like loads of. If I'm not going to go down the trading rabbit hole because I think everyone knows that that's moot. So I'll kind of attack something more generic and abstract. But I see that with gaming, the AML KYC concerns particularly are fairly fairly big. Um, I would suggest that if you're going to launder money, you should probably do it via a game such as Axie Infinity. And if you did it via Tornado, you're pretty rookie. That's kind of where I see things. There's a strong reason people in rough areas go to casinos to launder their funds. It's because playing a game is one of the most efficient ways to launder your money. So
Gotcha.
I think this is where when you have these complicated game mechanics, which are frankly full of loads of different random chance mechanisms, it's just a laundering uh, empire in reality. And I think that it's not just like the money laundering side of gaming. I think it's also the idea that realistically, if we become parents and our kids are at the age of 14 or something, would you want your own personal credit card to get drained by your kid because he wants to buy some crappy red item rather than a purple item? And so that in that respect, the age limit, I think, is a significant concern. There was also a lot of stuff put out, I think about 3 years ago, some kids created a mechanism via FIFA. If you remember this, FIFA Ultimate Team, they allowed people to buy tokens on FIFA Ultimate Team, thereby linking FIFA Ultimate Team tokens to real world currencies. And by providing that market, they were banged up in jail for I think they were fined $300 million. It was definitely like really high. It was either 100 or $300 million. And I think they got jail time as well because what they were doing is it was considered that they were providing gambling services for children and
Yep.
that they've been doing it on a mass scale. And they got them on loot boxes. That's why all the games shit their pants and then suddenly removed loot boxes. But I see that this particular thing, I don't think was specific to loot boxes. I think it was specific to kids being frankly able to just do real world trading through a game. And I think that's the big issue there. And I think that's the biggest area of growth. And I just don't think that the regulation has caught up to the games yet. And I think we're going to probably see some really serious enforcements coming through on games. I think they just had a side distraction and a red herring from FTX and all of the fallout there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it makes sense that we can expect that. There's a podcast you might like called Darknet Diaries that's it's kind of like a murder mystery. Like, you know, those like murder podcasts that people love. It's like that, but it's focused on like hacking. And so like it's got all like the hooky stories, but it's all like real and insightful. I think it's just similar in a way because it's like really addictive. But they've got one on what kids were doing to like make money on Roblox. I'll see if I can find the link for you. The it is a yeah whole can of worms for like kids with access to games, and it's like there's two sort of mindsets you could have with it. One is like shit, they're not in a position to like protect themselves and make good choices, and so if you've got money involved, that's like if you've got like yeah value involved, that's a um, pretty big thing to like, push on a kid. The other is that on the flip side, some of these kids might work out how to like do quite well, and I could see an argument about like if you could just give them the upside, that'd be easy. I wonder what the right balance is, because games are always something that does go back to to younger demographics. And if the future of gaming is on chain, how do you kind of allow that and not just say like, oh, underage can't play? Like, maybe it's not a regulator. Like maybe thoughtful construction of how an ecosystem operates could be a better sort of approach. But I don't. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Maybe other
I
people
think
watching
it's
this might have an idea, or you might.
if you want to explore this a little bit further, I don't know if you want to go on to a
Yeah,
different
why not?
topic. If you want to explore this a little bit further, I think that it's also worthwhile thinking about the fact that whenever you create a game, you're creating abstractly some kind of fancy version of a Rubik's Cube for someone to solve and get a reward out of solving it. So the moment you create a game which has a link to the reward mechanism, which then has a link to real world currency, effectively what you're saying is I give you a Rubik's Cube, you solve the Rubik's Cube, and I give you a $Alex token, so some bullshit shit token.
Yeah.
But then if I link that $Alex token to dollars, then I've just given you some real money, according to the floating value of that.
Yeah.
So depending on like how many people want, so if there's some kind of utility where you can then allow someone to like cheat at their Rubik's Cube and solve it a little bit quicker, then suddenly you can then start making money by solving Rubik's Cubes and doing this bullshit task that's a waste of your time.
Yeah.
Now, in that respect, if you think about Rubik's Cubes, they're incredibly easy to solve on a computer because these are not real world problems. These are digital problems that you're solving with a computer. So the first thing that if I saw you making money with, and you've obviously had a background in traditional finance, you're probably going to think the same way. If I saw you making money with some bullshit game like a Rubik's Cube, and making like say, let's say you make your
Yeah, you're just going to
delta
pile
value.
in. You're going to add
Yeah,
all your
exactly. I'm
sophistication,
going
all
to
your
automate the
analysts,
shit
all
out of
your
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I
I mean,
guess like
but there's
yeah.
a bounding condition. There's the bounding condition, right? So the bounding condition is what I like to think of as how much money would I walk past on the street with, and that's basically your dv by dt. So how much value you expect to make in a unit time, and to be able to not give a shit. So
Yeah.
you look at most people walk down the road, if they see like a dollar on the road, well, to be honest, a dollar's probably the threshold for a lot of people to actually
See a
bother
penny,
picking up.
pick it up all day long. Have good luck.
Most people don't give a shit though. You see so many pennies sitting on the road, especially in central London. I think most people probably leave up to about 10 pence in the UK on the floor,
Yeah. Fair.
because they'll be too embarrassed or too supposedly in a rush,
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
big money. Probably less than 10p for the time it takes to pick them up, but
Yeah.
realistically, most people probably leave it. So,
I-
but then you've also got to think of the time sunk into it. So you're looking at that. So you're taking your dv by dt minus that constant of time that you give a probability to in your head.
Dollar
So
value by dollar time. What's
unit of
DV?
time. Yeah. So
Okay.
so the value you expect to make, right? So it's the d expectation over derivative of time. So how much you
Okay.
expect to
Yeah.
make in unit
Gotcha.
per, how much you expecting to make per unit of time minus your sunk cost, and then you're expecting that to be like that's your profit margin, right? And then if that's not big enough, you're not going to bother. But if I see you making some profit margin in a unit of time that is like big enough for me to give a shit, then I'm
Yeah.
going to come in, I'm going to automate the hell out of that. And
Yeah.
this is where the Soulbound tokens come in, because at the moment, by definition, every game is effectively like the Rubik's Cube, but like but it's just a more complicated version of Rubik's Cube. So Axie Infinity, for example, if I see people making loads of money on Axie Infinity, let's go to something I'm probably more familiar with, because I don't really know how I don't want to sound like an idiot with Axie Infinity, but I played like RuneScape for 10 years, so I know exactly how that works. And I'm sure probably a lot of people watching this actually are familiar with RuneScape as well. So RuneScape didn't even have a real world mechanism. They had frankly a very leaky access to real world capital from RuneScape coins, via kind of illicit activity. It was not allowed to do what's called real world trading on that game. But even still, there was a dollar value for GPs, as they call them in the game, coins. And to that extent, bots sprung up in a big way. Because if you were making characters, skills, or items that perceivedly had a perceived real world value, And basically, the game got so out of control with botting that they then had to basically change the entire game mechanics to prevent this because they were like Singaporean, not Singapore, that's a bad place. I think it was Vietnam that was a big place, Vietnam and Cambodian sweatshops that were springing up, South America sweatshops of people basically sitting in a factory playing RuneScape all day long on like 10 computers and trying to automate and bot as much as possible to basically just purely sell money and characters and skills to like American and European
Yeah.
buyers. And I see that by definition, every game, once it hits a certain profitability for particular activities um, because of the market cap of the game and the interest, as soon as the supply gets to a certain absolute level, the game will implode. And the
Mm.
game has to implode by definition because at some point your DV by DT for the botters becomes high enough where you should absolutely flood the game with bots.
Yeah.
Because that's the point where and then that's the point where you cripple the game because the game becomes overrun by nothing but bots. The individual players then leave the game and the game shrinks, and then the supply and demand rebalance again according to botting and non-botting to the extent where the botting is no longer profitable anymore. And that's basically what destroys a game. And I see that on-chain games have that problem way more than by definition of liquidity, right? They're literally providing a liquid market. So
And it's all
Soulbound tokens,
native, so it's not like you have
yeah,
to go.
exactly.
It's all visible as well, so you can see where people are making money. But it maybe took a little while for people to realize that others were making money selling WoW Gold because they had to hear about it through the grapevine because
Exactly, yeah.
it wasn't transparent. You couldn't just see it, and yeah,
And
that's
also
fair.
it's more difficult to sell it, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I've sold some coins to friends here and there. Like I had to go to school and like try and like find people to buy this stuff. It's like difficult.
yeah.
I've got to establish a market as a market maker in a real world environment where frankly no one gives a shit. So
I think
it's
that's
like it's a
why
difficult activity to do.
Jesse Powell created Kraken. I believe he did it off the back of getting involved in the World of Warcraft um, gold trade, and they were trying to facilitate payments internationally, and it was really difficult to sell gold to someone in the US versus someone like in a different place because it was all, fiat rails and over 10 years ago now. And then when he heard about Bitcoin, he went, "Oh, this could solve that problem," and that's what got him into it. There's a couple of things that you've touched on, and maybe like I think probably the exploitation is probably a really strong one because what you've just described is like, yeah, you could end up with children being forced to play these games, and it's like um, that's uh, obviously not ideal, and you could end up with other people being exploited. And like I have a bit of context on Axie, not directly, but I know that like you had this cost to play of 1,000 US dollars, and then you could earn when you played up until that thing sort of exploded or hit the top. I don't know where it's at now. I don't really follow it, but I started off when I heard about guilds that were basically they would buy all the assets and then they would assign the assets, the play like the characters to like I know like the Philippines was massive where players would play with their guild's assets and then do like a revenue share on how much they earned. And so like the player might get 70% and the guild gets 30, but the guild doesn't have to go and play the actual game. They've got the
Mm.
capital to buy the assets. And I started off kind of thinking, well, this is like a bit um it's kind of like, maybe just capitalistic, right? It's like it's a bit of a you're in a different position to the people playing and I was a bit on the fence about how I felt about that, but when the market turned around and just absolutely ate it, it kind of made me realize actually for a lot of the people that were playing the Axies, they were getting paid a lot of the time straight into or converted into stables. So they weren't exposed to the price movements of the Axie like NFT character things. And I thought that was actually like maybe for the better. Like you didn't have a whole group of people buying these Axies with money that might have been a lot to them, and then having that go down in value. So it was like still in two minds about it. Um, I guess on the like, there was another thing you touched on where that I think is actually important. So the KYC sort of stuff that you're playing with, it's not so much on the Soulbound tokens, but rather like having a wallet identified and linked, and you can do that with like off-chain, like signatures, right? Um, and so it's not public. I guess the Soulbound community, from what I see, they're very much focused on giving a wallet an identifier that represents maybe not an identity, but a participation, an involvement, a credit. Like they showed up, they contributed, they got a Soulbound, they did the action, they got a Soulbound, and they can't transfer it easily at least. And that means that if you're looking at a wallet and they hold that Soulbound token, you can like you know that they were there. They must have been at that live performance or whatever it is. Like if it's a community reward thing, I guess what you've kind of opened up is like a pretty viable need to have. Maybe you do want some privacy where not anyone can see the wallet that the Soulbounds are in. And it's like I guess, would you have feedback for the people thinking about soulbounds about all kind of things they might want to consider if they are putting, very public things into being associated with the wallet? Like, what is the risk
Yeah,
for
I
that
think that
that wallet
first
holder?
first yeah, yeah, I agree with the way you go with this. I think firstly, the kind of the DeFi community are a subsection, a very small subsection of people who have an appetite to do this kind of stuff. You see the pushback on CBDCs, for example, and how aggressive that is across the general population. And I think that when an echo chamber quite easily if you start if you start talking with just nothing but the population at ETH Denver, which is currently going live right now. Brilliant place. But definitely there's not a huge variety of opinions compared to like outside of ETH Denver in the wide world, where I think there's very few people that would want to associate their bank balance with what concert they went to or like what they ate for lunch or who they've gone out to see. Because I think all of these kind of things, effectively what you're doing is you're associating your bank balance with your Facebook profile in like a more modern day format, right? And I think that there's a lot of people who are not too sure they want to do that, and would rather stay anonymous. You can think of the most extreme examples, right? Who are celebrities. If you're a celebrity, do you want people to always know your net worth at any given point in time? Good example would be 50 Cent, I think, declared bankruptcy supposedly. Was he bankrupt? Another one is who's the tennis player? The German tennis player keeps cheating on his wives, allegedly. Went to prison for fraud for declaring bankruptcy, wasn't actually bankrupt. Like you can see a raft of different cases where particularly certain individuals. I mean, I've just talked about two fraudulent cases. Well, the first one isn't necessarily fraudulent. I wouldn't want to like
Yeah,
indicate that per se, but
yeah,
there's the questionable bankruptcy cases. Give kind of the pinnacle of an example of why someone wouldn't want to associate their entire real world assets on chain with their identity, or at least enough credentials that you can pin down who they are.
yeah.
So I think that's one of the kind of the big issues that but I don't think that's necessarily that difficult to solve. I think there's loads of ways you can solve that. Just spin up a load of wallets, have a wallet that's not your bank balance, don't trade between the two.
Yeah,
Just
even
have,
that's
I think a
still
lot of people
tricky
just,
though. Like I've got an ENS that I made a little while ago, and when I go to fund it, I'm like, how do I fund this without connecting it to
especially
a
now Tornado's got a
other?
thing, right? So now Tornado
Yeah, and
Cash
like
is
I
in the
never
thing. It's
used
very
it
difficult to do
before,
that.
but I and now sound like Tornado would actually be really helpful to this because it's like
Yeah.
the the concerns of my other wallets, they're far more based in like I don't want my friends seeing that I bought this like shitty thing I shouldn't have bought. Do you know what I mean? Like I bought an
Yeah, there's
embarrassing
some
thing.
NFTs you bought which are just
And
outright
like and
embarrassing. You spent like 200
yeah,
grand on an ape and you're just like, man, that was like a lot of money that I pissed away. And I
yeah,
don't want to embarrass myself by actually having that still in my wallet.
literally. And also like if it's public, you lose like if it's your friends, you can joke about it or whatever. They'll hit you up like, what's this, man? But if it's public, you don't get any kind of like people want to like be able to make sure that they're presenting the way that they like, because they're not able to defend themselves if it's just fully
Yeah,
public.
you become like
Um,
you become at risk of being like just generally a tabloid piece just for having bought like the highest cap of a crypto punk or the lowest cap of an ape, or you're
yeah,
by definition going to be a story.
yeah,
So it creates a big problem if somebody can then figure out who you are from like all the things that you've done. I think that the second point would be in terms of the standards for doing things like soulbound tokens. So to some extent, in keyring, we are doing a soulbound token because we are associating some kind of KYC element to a wallet, and you can't remove it from that wallet or sell it. But it's not the case if we're doing in ERC20, we're not doing like some kind of token. And I think this is where the NFT craze has kind of defined the way a lot of people think about things like soulbound tokens, right? Because in my mind, I don't know if NFTs are actually going to be a thing in 5 years' time. Like, is it realistically is 721 going to be? Is it 721 or 712? I can't remember. We do a lot of stuff in 712, so I forget whether it's 721. I think it's 721, isn't it?
Yeah,
But either
ERC
way, it's this.
721. Yep, yep.
Yeah, either way, the NFT standard is kind of moot here because the idea in such a rapidly moving ecosystem that NFTs in that particular standard are going to be any less redundant than a floppy disk in 5 years' time means that it's actually you're then pegging your entire business on basically a USB stick or a CD-ROM or like a VHS. And really, the only thing that NFT should really be is just like it's a data storage thing, like a JSON. Frankly, there's
Yep.
nothing more fancy to it. And the fact that people want to put images on it, it's just a waste of gas, in my opinion. So what kind of my attitude towards credentials or information stored on the blockchain is don't do it in any kind of fancy format. Do it in the minimal format you can possibly do. And if you need to make it work with any other standards, you do that off chain where you're not going to waste people's money. And that's I think the fundamental thing that I personally think is a good idea. Because realistically, do people like let's say if ETH starts hitting like $500 for gas again for a simple transaction, then you're going to end up with a significant amount of these soulbound tokens looking pretty expensive because they've got some fancy artwork embedded. And that's, I mean, whether or not they have it on IPFS or whatever is kind of moot. It's just unnecessary gas cost. And I think that's kind of my second thought there.
Yeah, okay. I guess my bounce back on that would be, I think we can be relatively confident there'll be a way to reduce costs. The NFT being relevant in a while, I think like we can see an example more recently of Bitcoin ordinals where projects are like you might be on an ERC 721, but then new standard comes out that's more got more utility, flexibility, use case. You probably see what's happened with Bitcoin ordinals where like people go on a remint, like they like migrate. And I don't like right now they're migrating just to like timestamp it on the Bitcoin blockchain, but I could see a scenario where you like move from an ERC 721, burn that mint on the new standard or something to like evolve. And in terms of pitches being valuable, I guess, yeah, there's probably different use cases, but I think they are a pretty good way of like signaling what community you identify with. And I think that's valuable sometimes. Like, um, there's a lot of communities doing the same thing, welcoming, fun, enjoyable, chatty, got the little private Discord, whatever. But I do think that I could see that arc going further, especially with things like Soulbounds, where you can really like show that you haven't just bought your place in the ecosystem late, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you've been present at all the town halls for the community where you've been contributing to like what your values are and stuff. Like, I think some like use cases to me do seem viable. But I think there's a lot of like tricky nooks that need to be sort of like thoughtfully approached. Trying to think, there's I guess Soulbound's off-chain proofs. Do you know much about account abstraction? I know that's been like a bit of a more recent topic, but part of me just intuitively, from my limited sort of dive into it, makes me think maybe that would be a way where you could have a wallet that holds the soul bounds, but when you engage, it's not like um, you have a proof that shows that you're allowed to vote because you're present at that meeting on day one, but you're not like revealing that address that holds it. Maybe something like that. I'm not sure.
I smiled because I know fuck all.
Yeah.
I know nothing about that. I
It's
think
like on the
like
list.
my,
I'm
my
like,
kind of yeah, my kind of expertise in DeFi is like extremely narrow on the areas that I need to focus within. So what I try and do is I tend to try and understand the areas that I need to understand quite deeply, but it means I probably ignore a lot of other areas. Like account abstraction is one of those things that I saw a lot of general words about, and I was like, I haven't got time to read about that at this moment in time.
Yeah, it's a hard one because you need the deep specialization to deeply specialize. But also I think we all kind of experience the upside of when you get that broad, like, oh, you're doing that, that's similar to this, and then it's like comes together. I guess maybe
Yeah,
that's something
I
I'm
kind of
hoping.
rely on other people to do that. So I rely on someone else. At the moment, it's
Yeah,
like for us personally, we're like just about to go to market. So it's a case of I
yeah,
just need to know what I'm doing and then nail it,
yeah,
get it going really well. And then maybe after we've already gone live, I can figure out whether account abstraction is something useful for me or not, and maybe
yeah.
do that deep dive. But
Well, I mean, like the maybe this is something that people in the SoulSync community that are sitting there watching, sitting in their seats, going like, "No, you're not talking about this thing that helps here." Like, maybe that's kind of the goal here is like, if you're watching this and you're thinking that, like, drop it in because it helps give signal. It's like if someone in the SoulSync community were like, okay, well, they must be like into the Soulbound space. If they've got a view that and they're saying, Alex, this affects your thing, like maybe that's how you can get some color and like re-rate the priority. Like, oh, someone does have context because they've watched the video and they're saying they think this is
yeah,
important. Like
if I
maybe
had
that
to
would
make a
be,
wild stab in the dark, I would assume that vaguely there might be some use of doing key recovery. But I wouldn't be able to say that I know enough about that to even
yeah,
pontificate on roughly how that would
I'm,
work.
yeah, I'm in admittedly a similar boat. I feel like there's some capability to like be able to have like with account abstraction, you can go and say like say your wallet is eligible for an airdrop that you need to mint rather than having to mint it with that wallet, you can like assign a different wallet that right and then it can mint. I think like that was one of the use cases, but maybe I'm getting wires crossed. Anyway, we'll probably wrap it there, keep it short and sweet. It sounds like you're doing some pretty interesting stuff, and I think I think there's going to be somewhere in the middle where like the extreme side of the soulbound kind of space, what people see the future as, and then there's like, you know, the existing kind of state of the world, and then there's like a bridging period where we've got to like marry the two together, and then like what's realistic and practical now versus later. Like I think there's a lot of really interesting conversations that can come out off the back of like even this chat. And yeah, I mean that's probably all I got for now. It was lovely to meet you. And
Yeah,
people
thanks for
in
your time,
the,
James.
yeah, no, it was great. It was good fun. We'll have to catch up again soon.
Let
And
me know
if
how
you're
your fish
watching
get
it,
on.
drop in. Yeah, they'll be okay. They'll, the medicine takes a couple of days, but
we
they'll
we
heal.
need to we need to have updates on that on the SoulSync community chat, I think.
Yeah, maybe I could like NFT the fish, like the names of the fish. They don't have names. I haven't named them. 'Cause I don't know why, but could have like a little mechanism where if you tip, the bubbles like turn on or something. I was thinking like a
That's
little,
probably genuinely an issue, is like because so many of them probably look so similar. You probably actually
yeah,
it'd be
there's a
worthwhile like creating a tag on them or something.
pretty much they all look the same except for maybe like five of them. I could tell five of them apart, but the rest are kind of like they all look like twins. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, good to have a chat.
Anyway, thanks.
Um,
Yeah, it's been great.
yeah, nice one. Take care.
Anyway, man. Bye.